Okay. Hi everyone. This is Cyron from the ICE Innovate Incubation Centers, and thanks everyone for joining today's pre-event, the webinar about we will talk about something related to lesson learned in the failures. And thanks Jeffrey for today's sharing. And before the session starts, I will introduce more about the summit because you guys may know that this one is a pre-event for the Entrepreneurial Future Leaders Summit. And the summit is next Friday, and we'll have a whole day event from 9 to 6 to talk more about entrepreneurial mindset. And we will have some panel sharing sessions, breakout via chat sessions, and also startup demos. So you can feel free to join each different sessions and talk with the audience. And as you may see, why we use meet this platform is that you can meet other audience at the same time. So you can networking with other audience and also enjoy each sessions. No matter you are startup founders or you are working for a company or you're students, we think that entrepreneurial mindset is essential for everyone. So we also have exclusive networking session on 24 on September, the day before the summit. So you can register on the Eventbrite and at our website. And for today's session, you can feel free to type in any question about the summit or about the sharing session at the task box. And also in a Q&A session, if you have any question to ask, you can click the raise hand buttons. So you can join the call and ask the question face to face. So I will pass my time to Jeffrey to give today's sharing. Okay, Jeffrey, can you hear me?
Thank you very much, Simon.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I can. Thank you, Simon, for having me. Tonight, we're going to talk about entrepreneurial, but also about failures and about lessons learned in startups. So let me share my screen. So, startups, where are the pitfalls? First of all, before we talk about startups, we have to figure out what exactly are startups, right? So a startup is a human institution designed to deliver a new product or service on the condition of extreme uncertainty. And the key point here is extreme uncertainty, because that's where the crux is when you talk about lessons learned, failure, and other things. So extreme uncertainty. What does that entail when you're talking about your journey as an entrepreneur or building a team? It's one of the aspects there is risk. You have to have a significant risk appetite if you want to become a startup founder or an entrepreneur, because being an entrepreneur, the risk is yours. There's nobody above you. There's no boss above you. There's no professor above you. There's nobody at that point above you that at that point says to you, you're doing it wrong. So the risk and the buck stops with you. Also, one of the items is stress. Stress is a big item as an entrepreneur. Even if everything goes smooth, you always have stress. Do I have enough staff? Do I have enough cash in the bank to pay the salaries at the end of the month? Do I have, etc. Stress is very big issue when you're doing and you're being an entrepreneur. Also, at that point, your lows. You can have extremely, extremely lows, and you have to be able to handle that. You have to be able to cope with that. There are mechanisms to help you cope with that, but you cannot always prevent lows or risks. So, who am I? My name is Jeffrey Brewer. I've set up 5 businesses and 2 startups. Startups, in the definition that we talked about earlier, 5 businesses as in regular business. I did it over 3 continents, in Europe, Asia, and North America. I've been in Hong Kong for over 9 years now, and I had the privilege to see the sunrise on a couple of companies. First of all, Compactive. There was a company that I set up when I was still doing my bachelor degree back in the Netherlands. After that, I graduated and I set up a company called Goldpoint. It was a computer wholesale company. Then I had a little skip here, but then after that I set up Recore, a data recovery company. Then I moved to Hong Kong. I did the international expansion of Recore, but I also set up a new company called Grayscale, which was a UX web design agency. During that, I also did a startup called Surround App, where we enabled China social media for people who could not read Chinese. After that, I also set up a company, a startup called SmartLoop.ai, which was in Silicon Valley, Palo Alto. And now I'm running a company called Koopa, just on my own, very easy, very relaxed. But I saw the sunrise on those companies, but I also saw some sunsets on a couple of those companies. I saw the sunset on Compactive. I saw the sunset on Goldpoint. I saw the sunset on Recore. Grayscale is still fully bright, beaming. I actually exited that. I had an exit on that company. Surround App, sunsetted. SmartLoop, still alive and kicking, but I'm out of the operations right now. And then Koopa, alive and kicking. What I can tell you is it gets better at the ladder. So the more you do, the better you get at it. That's also something that I try to teach at the Founder Institute. Founder Institute is a program that I run here in Hong Kong together with Leo, where we help aspiring entrepreneurs to form their business. I've been doing that now for 5 years. I helped over 134 founders, mostly to validate and traction on their ideas, but recently also we have another growth and funding section on that. I really like to help those founders with my experience as an entrepreneur to help those people find their way into entrepreneurship. But maybe more applicable to this talk is I also organize a conference called Postmortem Conference, where founders, mentors, investors, and lawyers share their experience and their lessons in working on, for, or with startups. And as a spin-off of that, I also have a podcast, which is quite active right now, the MayoKoopa podcast. It's a bi-weekly podcast where I interview people about their lessons learned in startup. MayoKoopa means through my fault. So I really go down personally about the lessons learned at startups. The event is organized already for 4 or 5 times in person. There's actually one pending right now, but we had to postpone that due to COVID. But it is very personal. Like we had, for instance, a founder sharing that because he was always working on a startup, day in, day out, so hard, that at one point his girlfriend came to him and confessed, "I cheated on you." Or we had a founder that shared about the fact that his co-founder went off with all the money in the bank, basically bled the company dry. So at that point he had to live in London for 8 months without electricity and hot water. But he got the company back up again. And those kind of nitty-gritty items are there. In the podcast, for instance, I interviewed a founder that had an idea, found a co-founder, they worked on it, then the co-founder found an investor, and at the same time they also found a client. And just before the client signed and just before the investor signed, her co-founder at that point took off and set up a different company with the same idea. Took the client and took the investor and set it up, leaving her behind with basically an empty shell. Those are the things. And the lessons learned there, for instance, is have a co-founder agreement. Put things on paper. Even if it's just an email to confirming, hey, we just had a great session together. We're going to work on this. We just decided to confirm that you're going to work on XYZ, I'm going to work on ABC, and we're going to split up everything that we earn in this way. Luckily, there is no lack of content because more than 95% of startups fail. So there's a lot there to learn. Because, be honest, when I get a pat on the shoulder because I'm doing something right, then it feels great, but I haven't really learned anything yet. Because at that point, I've done something that I already know. But when you fail or you make an error, then at that point, you know that you did something wrong, and the next time you shouldn't do that, or you should do it differently. There at that point comes in also, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. So at that point, that means a team. Have people around you. Create an ecosystem around you where at that point you can ask people to help you. That could be mentors, that could be investors, that could be your co-founders, that could be friends and family. But that's very important because that together, that ecosystem around you will definitely help make or break you. I've seen it many times with founders that I coach and that I help. At that point, the founders that have a network of people that they often go to for advice, they get further down the road than people who are just sitting and working on their startup and not reaching out. Recently, CB Insights did a survey on the top 20 items why startups fail. From that, I will take it from the top 7. So at number 7 is a product without a business model. So that's a reason why startups fail. They have a product without a business model. So they don't have a revenue. People don't want to pay for it, or they don't know how to pay for it. Or you have a product that you don't know how to charge for it. That's number 7. Number 6, a user-unfriendly product. Very important. User experience is very important and the usability of your product is very important. Why does Airbnb so well? Is because the usability is that high. Uber usability is that high. The design is very good. 99% of the design is invisible. But it's there. It has to be developed. It has to be done. Number 5, price and cost issues. So number 5 reason why startups fail, price and cost issues, could be that you cannot make it work because you have to charge a too high price, or you actually made the error to come in with $1 a month. But at that point, you cannot make a business out of that because you only have 100 clients, and $100 a month is not going to give you a sustainable business. Number 4, get outcompeted. Execution is everything. Later on, I will tell also indeed that ideas are cheap, but execution is everything. So you have to do it. You have to know your target audience. You have to live and breathe them, and you have to execute. You have to compete with the people already out there. Number 3, I think actually that's one of the top 1 or 2, not the right team. Team is very important. As you might know, it's easier to change a broken product than it is to change a broken team. Teams is personality. Teams are people working together. Teams are people who are, getting a little bit irritated of each other. Yeah? But not the right team, it's very high up in the reasons why startups fail. Number 2, running out of cash. I will get back to that later. And number 1, biggest reason is no market need. You're building something that people don't want. The number 1 reason why startups fail. They cannot, or you cannot market it. People just don't need it. They're not taking it. They're not buying it from you. There's no market need for what you're trying to solve. So let's get back to that number 2, running out of money. In my booklet, running out of money is not a valid reason to fail, because there's a causation and correlation, right? Running out of money means that there's something else wrong. Because if you really have a promising idea, then there's always an investor that wants to invest in you and put money in you. If you really have a product that people really want, then you will be able to sell it. So running out of money for me is mixing up causation and correlation. So what I said earlier, execution, that's so important. Having the grit to make things work, having the grit to stay up, but not until 4 a.m., but just the amount that is needed. Execution and not sitting and waiting for things to happen, that's very important. Also what I said, team, very important. Going back to that podcast interview, what I said, right? 2 co-founders have nothing on paper and 1 splits. But it could also be that when you're really working together, you start realizing, I actually don't like this person. And then you have to be able to get along. And if not, then you have to be able to split up. But what if you already promised that other person 50% of the shares? Then that person walks away with 50% of the shares. That means the end of your startup. That's where, for instance, cliff investing period comes in. Market, very important. Your market is very important. Where are you going to sell this? You have to be able to live and breathe your market. You have to be able to know exactly what your market is doing. The people and where you're selling it to, you have to know them by heart. You have to know them when they go to bed, when they sleep. You have to know them when they get up. You have to know them what kind of phone that they have. But you have to know your market. Otherwise, it will be very hard to get into that market. So quite often, I like when the founders, or at least one of the founders, is an industry expert, a subject matter expert. And then, of course, ideas. Ideas are cheap. I can give you 4 or 5 startup ideas right now. And they're worth nothing if you don't execute. So let's get a little bit personal, because that's what it is, right? Where should you look for, and what are the things that can come across when you're going on an entrepreneurial journey somewhere in your life? First of all, you have the opportunity cost. Working on a startup quite often doesn't give you a salary or very low salary. You could also start working for a big corporation or in the family shop and then earn some money. Those are the opportunity costs. Maybe at that point you're missing out on being able to get a mortgage on a house when the house prices are very low. I had that personally. I was working on one of my companies, and because that company was not older than a year, I couldn't get a mortgage. At that point, the house prices were very attractive. But I couldn't buy because I couldn't get a mortgage. 2 years later, when the company failed, it was over. But at that point also, the prices of houses were low. So that's what you have to take into account when you talk about opportunity cost. Another thing is mental health cost. The stress, the extreme uncertainty, what I talked about earlier. The risk. It can break you. So you have to be aware, even if one of your friends is an entrepreneur, sometimes just ask him very honestly, hey, how are you doing? You know what? I will come to your office, we'll open up some beers on Friday afternoon, and you get out of there for at least a few seconds behind your computer. Help those people, because it's not easy. Also, relationship cost. Not everybody will be supportive if you decide to become an entrepreneur. Because not everybody understands that, because not everybody can handle that risk or that uncertainty. It could be that your partner at that point says, hey, all nice, but I'm not going to do this. It could be that your parents or your family or sometimes even friends say, hey, I don't know what you're doing, but you're crazy. And that really costs relationships. That costs friends. Beside the fact that you're very hardworking. Remember, right? The founder that shared that his girlfriend came to him and that she confessed that she cheated on him. Now they're married, so it ended up well, but still. So at that point also, advice. Also advice is cheap, but good advice is costly. I've seen a lot of founders and a lot of entrepreneurs go seek advice everywhere and then stick with the people that at that point are giving them the things that they want to hear. I had founders coming over talking to me saying, yes, here's our stickers, here's our business card, this is our marketing website that we designed to promote our product. And then I was like, where's your product? No, we still have to develop that. I'm like, shouldn't you try to develop it first and talk to the potential customers before you start marketing what you're doing? No, we're going to do this. I've never seen them afterwards. And I know that they went with a mentor that at that point said, like, yeah, that's great. And like a marketing mentor, like, let's put this up and like, let's get you into magazines and articles online and TechCrunch and that kind. That was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And that company doesn't exist anymore. I think it didn't even launch. So it is really, really delicate. And sometimes good advice is not the advice that you want to hear. But take it from people who already been there. Ask the people that you ask that advice to, like, are you responsible for your own salary? Because that's what you are, right? There are so many service providers that at that point say like, hey, that's great, and they see a potential customer in you. But you have to be honest. So startups can be glorious, but if you can't emotionally handle serious low, don't be a co-founder. Be a VP of something, a vice president of something. That's okay. Not being a founder is okay. There are too many entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are people who want to be an entrepreneur just to be an entrepreneur. But that's the wrong goal. I rather talk to people who don't want to be an entrepreneur, but found something that nobody is solving. So they have to solve it because nobody else is doing it. I told you earlier, the podcast, MayoKoopa. It's about, through my fault. Here's a little personal MayoKoopa. That traction isn't everything. I did a startup, SurroundApp, where we enable Chinese social media for people who cannot read Chinese. And it was going great. We had an app where you could load Chinese social media in and have a machine translation one-on-one. So at that point, together with the machine translation, which was not always correct, of course, but together with the pictures of that post, you got some context of what the post was about. The idea was that if you really wanted to know what it was about, you could ask for a human interpretation, human translation. And we got a lot of traction. We got tens of thousands of downloads of the app. But then we found out that a lot of those downloads were coming from Southeast Asia. And then we started to dig deeper and like, why are they coming from Southeast Asia? What are people doing there? And then we found out that a lot of teenagers in Southeast Asia were using our app to follow their idols and singers and stars on Sina Weibo. Because, and then mostly that was at that point K-pop. Because the K-pop artists would post on Twitter in Korean, but would post on Sina Weibo in Chinese. But most of the people that we served at that point in Southeast Asia were not able to read either of those languages. So they would use our app to translate from Chinese into English and still be able to follow their idols. But then the question is, of course, yes, there's a lot of traction. But what is the real spending power of a teenager in Southeast Asia? Do you really want to make money out of that? And how? Beside the fact, at that point, it was 6-7 years ago, Southeast Asia is still unbanked, but back then it was not even possible to do payments. So traction isn't everything. And that is at that point a little bit of my MayoKoopa where we went wrong with that startup. And then I have a little MayoKoopa on the MayoKoopa podcast, which I found out today. Because the MayoKoopa podcast for the startups was outcompeted by another MayoKoopa. This one, Michael Cohen, the lawyer of Donald Trump. He 4 days ago released a podcast series with the first episode 4 days ago called MayoKoopa. Now, if you type in MayoKoopa podcast, this one will be as first in the search engines. So I wouldn't say this is a low, but this is definitely something of the uncertainty, of the extreme uncertainty, if you develop something. Because this will be in the history for at least the next 10 years, the podcast that will come up if you search for MayoKoopa podcast. and not the MayoKoopa Startup Podcast, which before that was. So these kind of things happen, and you cannot prevent that. So the only thing at that point what you can do is work around with it. Try to find another solution, and don't beat yourself up to it. Don't be discouraged, because there's always another day. So I want to thank you. If you need any additional information, you can reach out to me on Twitter or on LinkedIn. If you add me on LinkedIn, write a little introduction where you saw me. Or at that point, of course, look for the MayoKoopa Startup Podcast, or just go to MCP, MayoKoopa to sign up for the podcast. And then every 2 weeks, we have a new interview for you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And let's see if any questions from the audience. Maybe I have one question first. Because you mentioned
Sure.
that team is one of very important elements for a startup. But how to find the right team? Because there are many ways, like maybe join the hackathon or join some programs or find the friends to join the teams. So which way you think is a good way to find the right team?
That's always an interesting question, right? Finding a team. Quite often, if you look at research also done when it is about building startup teams, quite often it's people that already know each other, either through school or through work, or they are friends in the sense of maybe not close friends, but they know each other already for many years. Because especially when it is a startup, you have to start working together very closely. And if you just run into the street, you run into somebody, say, hey, can you code? Or are you a marketing person? Yes, I can do that. And then get them on board. Then, yeah, it's not that you can fire them after 2 or 3 months, right? Because they're a co-founder. It's a team.
Mm.
So quite often what you see is that teams are being formed by people that are already knowledgeable to each other, that they already know each other, colleagues, school, friends.
Mm.
Sometimes, it can also be an introduction through a friend, but mostly it's about existing relationships.
Got it. Okay, we have one question from the audience. Any suggestion on how to manage an unpredictable team? Because he is fear someone from him. So the question is, how can the founders keep the team engaged with the startups? Because there may be many different kind of peoples, and it is very diverse. It will be.
Team engagement. If you cannot keep a team of, say, 4, 5, 6, 7 people engaged, then at that point you have a serious problem. Because quite often what you see is team engagement becomes a problem when you're like 25 or 50 people, or maybe even more. Right? There are whole engagement teams at big corporates to keep staff engaged. As a founder, you are the motivator. You are the person who keeps people going, and keep them close. Keep them informed. Like, it's a startup. don't try to hide. Share, I don't know, every week at the end of the week, kind of like a scrum session. What have you done? What are you going to do? And what are the biggest hurdles that you're foreseeing? Share with everybody growth figures, new users, implement OKRs. At that point, people can really see what their influence is on the product. It's great for a designer to see that if they designed a new a landing page, that all of a sudden, with the same amount of traffic coming in, the amount of conversions goes up with 20%. Share that information. That's what a lot of people want to hear. Coders want to see their code being used. I still have to see the first technical person that says, I'll just code. It doesn't matter to me if it's being used or not. No, like they want to build something that is going to be used or is being used. Marketing people, yeah, you should update them with what's going on at the technical department. Keeping people informed, that's, in my opinion, one of the best ways to keep people engaged. As soon as you start making silos and a group of three, 4 people don't know what the other group of 3, 4 people are doing, that's not good. So also at that point, maybe try to do breaks, try to do team things that you do together. Try to keep people engaged in that way. And if the team members are not reacting on that well, then you have to ask yourself, are these the right people to be in a startup team? Maybe at that point that people will do better in a corporate environment.
So can I say that it is important to keep the team updates and also let them think that they are not just working for a company, they are also part of the startup to grow together?
Oh, definitely. Like when I was at one point in my life, I was also an employee. Not many years, by the way, but there was one company that was the first time that I saw that were sharing every 6 months the figures of that company. Mm-hmm. Like where was the growth, where was the decline? At that point, it was still KPIs, but they showed at that point where the KPIs were doing well and were not doing well. And it was not to shame and blame and to point fingers, but it was more like, hey, this is what we're working with. And this is where we did right, and this is where we did wrong. And that transparency, I think, is very important, especially in the early stage. Mm. At that point, the staff can see the results of their efforts.
But do you think transparency is one of the threat which will affect the startup? Because as some teams may think that I don't want to disclose too much about my business, I don't want to disclose too much to the employees, because they may think that they will steal their ideas and start their own business. So what do you think about it?
Do so. Like, luckily we live in Hong Kong. We have a rule of law here. So if an employee here in Hong Kong would walk away with your idea, you can sue them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, if you cannot trust your employees, who can you trust? Mm. So you have to be able to trust your employees. And if, on the other hand, Like there are multiple startups with the same idea, right? There are multiple ride-sharing apps. There are multiple search engines. There are multiple Zoom, AirMeet, Remote.co, which is fine. Actually, competition will keep you awake and will keep you aware. It would be very cruel if that comes from your own team. But in my point of view, if you cannot trust your own employees, then at that point you probably hired the wrong employees. Or at that point you're not incentivizing them enough.
Yeah. Okay, see if any other questions from the audience. If no, then thanks for your time today. And also, actually, Jeffrey is one of the speakers on next Friday's sharing. So see you again this Friday. Thank you.
See you again this Friday.